3, 2, 1. Hey there, you're joining me for the 4th episode in a series which asks, how much will it cost to stop climate change? In the last video, we committed to the more expensive green investments in transport, buildings and industry, as well as the cheaper sectors. But let's invest in the cheapest sectors first to get the best bang for our buck, right? Wrong. But that's not your fault, because all of economics is based around that principle. If you're familiar with supply and demand curves, the supply curve literally is the shape it is based on this cheapest first assumption. This concept is sometimes referred to by a different name, low-hanging fruit. Let's explain. If you want me to come and pick your apples, I'll charge you £1 per minute of my time. Actually, that's a really high wage. In fact, I will genuinely come and pick your apples if that's my rate. But anyway, it's just a representative number. So let's see how productive I can be. But wait, you may have spotted an issue already. This is a beech tree. Don't worry, there are 20 apples hidden in its branches, and I'm going to try and harvest as many as I can in 1 minute. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. I got 9, so you're getting your apples for about 11p each? But now, let's say you've sold the first 9 apples and you want me to collect some more. Here I go again. 3, 2, 1. I only got 4 because I collected all the easy ones last time. So now you're paying me 25p per apple. More than double as much. This is one example of diminishing marginal returns, and the assumption of cheapest first is baked into it. This principle defines the upward slope of the supply curve. But this principle is also a lot like Donald Trump. It doesn't work on climate change, and it's a bit simple. Time to show why cheapest is worst. So let's set up a scenario. We'll need to be able to implement some political reforms. So I'll just get myself a seat in Parliament and propose
You must attempt to recover your composure, man. I'm worried about you.
Okay, no, we won't do that. Gathering political support is beyond the scope of this video. So I'll take up my position as benevolent dictator instead. We can frame climate action in one of 2 ways. Get to zero emissions as quickly as possible within a given budget, or get to zero emissions as cheaply as possible by a certain deadline. I'm going to stick with the second option because it fits in best with the existing narrative, 2050 net zero, etc. I'm also going to keep talking about a 2050 deadline, even though I believe this is too late to stay within the 1.5 degrees of warming limit. You have to simultaneously understand that 29 years is an extremely short time to change the flavour of the entire world economy. Guys, we messed up. Anyway, now we're going to spend a lot of money on green technologies, but not cheapest first. Why? I'll consult my royal advisors. Actually, you know what? I'm getting pretty hot. I'm gonna ditch this whole dictator king idea thing. It wasn't really that relevant anyway. These 3 economists published a paper which forms the basis for much of this video. There are other articles which cover similar concepts, but I like the way this one is set out. And it was the first one I found on the topic when I was studying environmental economics, in the year 2 BC. There are 3 reasons for their counterintuitive approach: bottlenecks, learning by doing, and partial solutions. Number 1. Bottlenecks. The climate crisis is time constrained, and that changes the optimal order of spending. If we leave the expensive solutions until last, they will become even more expensive. Imagine trying to buy all the collectible rare books in the world. If you try to do it in 1 year, you'll flood the market and drive up the price. If you're more patient, you could subtly corner the market over the course of many years, keeping your average cost low. Now imagine you're trying to buy 1 billion electric cars in 1 year. They involve complicated manufacturing processes and many different supply chains, any one of which could clog up the whole system if it can't keep up with demand. Many decarbonisation processes also require skills and expertise, which will need to be built up over time. For example, How many ground source heat pump installers do you know right now? We need to spread the burden over many years to avoid creating supply chain bottlenecks. It's cheaper in the long run to start buying the expensive stuff in advance, like Christmas presents. Number 2, learning by doing. You may already be familiar with this one under a different name, Moore's Law. The cost of new green technologies will halve over constant time periods. They will get exponentially cheaper. The concept comes from computing, after Gordon Moore noticed that the cost of computer chips was following this trend. Since then, the same process has been seen in solar panels, battery storage, and other decarbonisation tech. But this isn't magic or some law of nature. It's not time itself that's lowering costs. It's the interlinkage between innovation and expected demand. Increasing sales of solar panels enabled manufacturers to invest in larger factories, cutting costs through economies of scale. They could also invest more in research, both directly and through accidental improvements, learning on the job, both of which made production cheaper still. But that's a linear effect, not exponential. So the next step is crucial. Ever cheaper products caused ever higher demand, growing the industry. And there we have the feedback loop. Now they can afford to invest and learn even faster. More growth, more innovation. Growth, innovation, and so on. So if we want to minimise the cost of decarbonisation, we'll need to make the most of Moore's Law. We should be front-loading our orders of green technologies and signing long-term procurement contracts. The sooner we spend money on new, unaffordable tech, the sooner it will become affordable. And it will stay affordable for the remainder of the transition period. And finally, partial solutions. The cheapest ways to cut emissions are often quick fixes. For example, mixing biofuels with natural gas in a power plant is much cheaper than installing a new wind farm. Many of the cheaper technologies improve the efficiency of existing fossil fuel processes, rather than replacing them. But once we've bought all the cheap solutions, the low-hanging fruit, we'll need to replace them with fully decarbonised solutions to make any further progress. It's cheaper to spend a lot on a wind farm now than to green up your power plant at lower cost, only to spend loads more on renewables a few years down the line. So let's aim for the full solutions first, even though they're more expensive. That concludes the list I compiled during my research, but I'd like to add one more factor which came to mind. Complementary investments, such as electric cars and charging points. Where a technology requires infrastructure, but the infrastructure is worthless without the technology, someone needs to get the ball rolling. Delaying projects like these will hinder private investment, regardless of whether they're cheap or expensive. This is a much more valid factor in the order of decarbonisation spending than marginal abatement cost. Right, to sum up, let's describe a well-balanced investment pathway. Firstly, we need to follow the tons, not the money. We should aim to reduce each sector's emissions smoothly over the course of the transition period, to avoid supply chain bottlenecks. So halfway to the deadline, we will have spent a lot on the expensive transport sector and a little on the cheaper waste sector. But both will emit 50% of what they do today. Next, we need to identify the complementary infrastructures required to spur private decarbonisation and front-load those. The same can be done in the sectors with potential for innovation, getting Moore's Law in motion. Finally, minimise spending on partial solutions to further reduce the cost. Once all this is done, we can see that a slightly front-loaded approach is most efficient. Okay, if your name isn't Biden, Johnson, Macron, etc., then you can switch off now. Thanks for watching. Right, you lot. You can collectively borrow almost infinite money for free during a global climate emergency. Maybe time to act? We need infrastructure and we need subsidies. That's it. Oversimplification, of course, but all you really need to do is pave the way for decarbonisation to become profitable. Now, let's all run along and see if you can do that before your next election, scandal, or climate apocalypse, okay? Last one to finish has to sit next to Bolsonaro in the UN canteen.